Hey, Stoney here with another game of Mechabellum. In this game, I am up against the other Sam B. I'm just going to call him Sam. And I'm a marksman specialist, and he is a speed specialist. I started off with Stormcallers, fans, and of course, level 3 marksman, and I'll be against sledgehammers and fans. Round 1 with the Stormcallers, they're naturally not going to be too great if the sledgehammers are allowed to get to the Stormcallers. So my primary task is to make sure that I have this thick layer of army between my Stormcallers and sledgehammers. And the weapon of choice is just a lot of chaff. My opponent does not have a lot of crawlers to start with. He can add 2 packs of crawlers, which he did. And I was banking on my crawlers to engage his while my fans kind of clear out his chaff with the help of my Stormcallers. It's a fairly common strategy. So instead of going for arc lights, which does help you clear out the chaff a little bit faster, but you'll be sacrificing a lot of tankiness. Right now, at least for round 1, the real carry units here is your Stormcallers. You're hoping that it will do the damage it needs. It will soften up the units. And of course, the carry for the opponent side would be these sledgehammers. All right. So my opponent did grow aggro on one side. Now, because of my thick layer of chaff, I was able to allow the Stormcallers to do the damage they need to do and take the first round. The second round, let's take a look at the cards. Intensive training is interesting. Subsidized Arclight is also interesting because I do have a chaff problem. For my opponent, I think intensive training is also good for him. Missile device is good for him because he is growing aggro. So whatever he can do to clear his front line of chaff, it will be really good. I took intensive training. I added another group of chaff, and I've added high explosive armor, high explosive ammo on my Stormcallers. Interesting thing about high explosive, even though on the description it says it decreases the attack by 40% while getting the benefit of a 5-meter splash. It may seem like a slight nerf of the Stormcaller, but in reality, I find it to work quite well against anything that's not a giant. So yes, when you're against the giant, all the missiles land in the same spot. It doesn't really matter if there's going to be splash. It's just a flat 40% damage reduction. But when you're landing on things that's not a giant, anything that has, I would say, even more than 2 unit models. So Typhoons, maybe not that good, but things like sledgehammers and of course most of the chaff, all of the chaff actually, the high explosive actually does really well because if you think about it, most of the missiles that land, for example, on a group of sledgehammers, they do not always hit their neighboring sledgehammers. But with high explosive, there always is a good chance, almost double the amount of splash damage for the sledgehammers. So even though you're reduced, even though you have a reduced damage, you're still doing almost the same, if not more damage because of the splash. You just have more missiles hitting sledgehammers over and over. All right, round 2, unfortunately, I did get overran by the additional crawlers and of course the flanking crawlers on the side. So in this round, I wanted to make sure I fixed that. Sabertooth was offered, is a solid choice. It gives me 1 additional buffer against his sledgehammers, and also these are very good to deal with sledgehammers as well. Now, because I already have a pretty thick line of fans, I want to make sure that I use the Sabertooth to counter the sledgehammers. I added the replicate on the crawlers because I noticed there was a problem last game where the flanking crawlers as well as this crawlers coming down from the top was just overwhelming my fans just a little too quickly. My opponent took the level 3 fans, mobile beacon it to the tower. I think this is a great play. because once he's got the tower and for the next turn, if I have any response to it, he can always sell it and he can pivot to something else. So this is a great tempo play from Sam. I really like it. For me right now, I'm still very much on the defensive. I'm just trying to solve the chaff problem, and I'm also trying to deal with the sledgehammer problem. And Sam is adding another layer of issue with the introduction of the wasps. I really like it. Okay, so he added a few more sledgehammers, just piling onto the problem here. The wasp, I think this is a very safe approach to the tower. I don't believe there's any reason for him to expect. Maybe, yes. I could put fans here, but these are level 3 wasps, so I would actually just go straight to the tower. It saves you a bit of time. But this is good as well, right? It arrived just in time, and it was still able to clear up the rest of the board. Alright, excellent play by my opponent so far. Putting a lot of pressure on my side of the board. And the ball is really on my court to solve all the problems that he's presented so far. So let's see what are some of the possible solutions here. Mass-produced wasp is very tempting if I really want to go hard against his wasp. Right now, he only has one squad of wasp. He had a couple squads of fans, but I figured that would be a pretty decent wall of chaff. And also a bit of a chaff clear as well, because you could put range on this wasp and they would perform actually quite well against the fans as long as they don't take range. Deployment spec is interesting, but I've decided to take a skip. My opponent took the acid and is putting down the sledgehammers. I understand that the acid works really well against large units, but I think it might be a bit of overkill for these sledgehammers, as they're not that tanky. I mean, they're just, yes, they're tankier than your, I mean, the saber-tooth, they're tankier than your sledgehammers, but they're not tanky enough to warrant an acid, and acid is a quite expensive card. Okay, so my opponent put the wasp on the side. I've decided to supplement my army with some mustangs. This is a fairly late mustang switch. I did it purely out of the respect for these wasps. I expect them to be moved around, and if they're not moving around, these mustangs do serve a fairly good purpose of cleaning out these fans. The reason I'm saying this late is because it's already round 4, which means in order for these mustangs to get level, they'll have to kill either a lot of chaff or get really lucky on one of these larger units. Mustangs at low levels are very weak. They start to really shine starting at level 3, which is why when you see an elite Mustang card, do consider it. It is expensive, but level 3 Mustangs is a proper carry unit, and they also deal great damage to the chaff, so you can use that as a chaff clear to help with your larger units as well. All right, so my opponent was able to take tower and overwhelm this side because of the acid. Not so much of the damage the acid caused directly, but the additional debuff, because any unit that's standing in acid takes 250% damage. So that allows these sledgehammers to bring down my saber-tooth in a fairly efficient manner. On my other side, I was able to take his tower because he practically had no units there, and also I have my level 2 Mustangs. This was a very clutch tower timing, right? I was able to take that. Level 2 Mustangs started to do a lot of work on these crawlers. As a matter of fact, the level 2, like these 3 Mustangs, was just shooting at all the crawlers, killing the rest of the squad, allowing my crawlers to finish his sledgehammers. So good stuff. All right, very close round. I think my opponent still has the tempo. Intensive training was offered again. I think Wasp one will be very interesting for me as well, considering he really doesn't have any defense in the back with the exception of Fangs. So I think I should be able to help. Now to look at it, maybe not. The Fangs are positioned fairly nicely, so if I put it in the middle, at least half of these fans from each squad will break off, and that should be enough to deal with the wasps. But maybe I'll put it on the side because only half of this squad will move to respond, where the other, I would say, quarter, quarter to a third, will start moving down towards the middle. All right, let's take a look at the board. So last round, I noticed I still have very much a chaff problem. My opponent already has a level 2 crawlers, which means my Mustangs are definitely not going to solve that issue. And neither is my Stormcaller. These are my 2 primary chaff clear. So I need another layer of chaff clear. My opponent currently does not have a lot of anti-air, so a wraith would be a logical decision. My Mustang got leveled to level 3. I also have intensive training available, but I didn't have money, so I wanted to save that for the next round. Alright, my opponent did upgrade the tanks. Now it's got mech rage. That's even more efficient. My sledgehammers are still standing in asset, so they're not going to win this fight this time. However, I noticed that there is no anti-air from my opponent's board, so I capitalize on that weakness with the wraith. So even if it can destroy everything here, which it will, I still get the win for this round because of the lack of anti-air. And that brings a very important point when you're building your board. Like, even though he has a lot of tempo, but it's always good to kind of keep in mind what sort of units that you want to build to cover all your bases. One single level 1 marksman or a set of phoenixes would have solved this problem for him. And yeah, and it usually doesn't, like, he doesn't need to put down an extra set of fans. He already has pretty strong tanks. Just go with the single marksman, and that will just cover that base for him. The 4 pillars of a good composition, right? You need chaff, you need chaff clear, you need anti-air, and you need anti-single unit. And everything else is optional. You don't need to have a giant unit, right? You don't need to have air unit yourself, but you do need to have anti-air. So if you just if you just have units that cover one of these 4 roles, then you have a pretty healthy board. Right now, he does not have the anti-air set. I mean, yes, he does have some fans, but the fans is not enough. All right, unit drop, melting point. Very interesting drop. I took the melting point because I also expect my opponent to take the melting point. What I really needed to do is I need to clear out these tanks. The fortress was not a good pick because melting point is also offered. So if I took the fortress and he took the melting point, then that would be a non-optimal matchup. The war factory here was risky, but I was banking on my layers of chaff on this side because I know that he's going to put a melting point somewhere on this side to counter my wraith. So I'm hoping that my chaff here will help my war factory to kind of get in range and kind of do the damage it needs to do. So why war factory? Well, he does have a lot of high-level sledgehammers. A fortress, even if they're at level 2, is not great at clearing out these sledgehammers quickly, especially if they're range and they have mech rage, because that will force your fortress to get upgrades. And right now, I really don't want to get upgrades on fortress, knowing that there's going to be melting point on the board. The war factory is more expensive, but they also do a lot more damage with a higher fire rate. So I'm hoping with the higher fire rate, I should be able to clear out his units a lot faster and allowing the rest of my board to deal with the melting point. So I'm monitoring the system here. I want to see how quickly can my war factory clear out the sledgehammers. Is that going to be before his melting point clears out mine, or is that going to be after? Because if it's going to be after, as you can see right now, then I'm in a bit of a trouble, because I need to figure out a way to get rid of level 3 sledgehammers quickly, or to stall his melting point in order to have an advantage. Now, fortunately, my left side was able to take tower, and now they're swinging down, and I was able to get this round. But that was a very serious problem, and I needed to fix that problem. So either answer the problem of how do I clear out the sledgehammers faster so my war factory can actually get to the melting point, or how do I get enough garbage or chaff in front of the melting point so that they're so busy with it, and by the time they're done with the chaff, I've already cleared out this sledgehammers. So I decided to go with the latter. Let's go with more chaff, and let's go with more chaff clear. I took the junior manufacturing. I've added extra pair of stormcallers so that I can clear out his shield of fans a lot faster. I took shield on my fans as well. Upgraded the war factory, so now there should be one-shotting these level 3 sledgehammers. My opponent did the most natural response when you see a war factory. You add more melting points. So I added two melting points here. And my issue here with this board is that even though my chaff on the right hand side is excellent, but my chaff right here in the middle is very poor. So essentially all he needed to do is to clear out these 2 fans, and the melting points could land on my war factory. So this is a lot of pressure, and once my war factory is gone, I have a lot of problem clearing out these level 3 sledgehammers. So this is a huge problem. As a matter of fact, this melting point has so much range, it doesn't even need my chaff. Doesn't even need chaff clear, just goes straight to my war factory. So this is a terrible position to be in. So I solved a bit of his problem, but his new problem, the introduction of these 2 melting points, was putting me in the back foot again. All right, so this is a brutal round for me. He's doing really well with his units. My Mustangs, though, are starting to shine. As you can see, once they get to level 3, they really do a lot of damage. All right, 3 melting point left over. It's got a bit more sledgehammers as well. These Mustangs are trying their hardest to bring down a melting point, but that's not going to happen. Okay, so that's round 7, and that's a huge chunk of damage to my health. And if he continues to add melting point, I think the next round could be the last. Laser sight was offered. I think this is an insta pick. I do have some very strong Mustangs. I want to make sure I use that. And also laser sight on a wraith with range, who's been constantly getting locked on by a melting point, I think is also great as well, because I needed this wraith to do some chaff clear. He's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 packs of chaff just on this side, and I needed this wraith to get those chaff clear. I sold my war factory because it really wasn't in a great position. It's getting locked on too quickly, and no amount of chaff that I put at the front is going to survive the onslaught of a mech rage or 2 packs of mech rage tanks. So I've decided, you know what? Let's get rid of the fortress. Let's strengthen our midline just a little bit more. And when the time is right, we'll reintroduce the fortress back into the fold. Not the fortress, the war factory. So how do I strengthen my line? Well, he has a lot of tanks. He has a lot of melting points. But I also have a lot of chaff clear. So I'm going to be able to clear his chaff very quickly. What I'm lacking is that once the chaff is clear on both sides, I don't have anything that's medium sized to kind of be a buffer before the melting point locks onto my war factory. So it's that medium sized range, the sort of pre-carry or pseudo carry, if you will. That's my problem. He's very good at clearing out his smaller units, as you can see. My chaff screen is almost gone at this point. But once the chaff is gone, all there's left to clear medium-sized units are these melting points. I think the sledgehammers are probably going to die very quickly. But things like the saber-tooth, they're going to stay a lot longer while the melting point focus on them. And this is the time where war factories can come in, do the damage it does, and destroy this melting point. Unfortunately for this round, he is still going to win because of the acid that's here. It was partially blocked, but it was mostly It has mostly landed on the ground, so it is a bit of a problem because when you have acid on the Sabertooth, it allows the sledgehammers to bring them down very quickly. And not to mention these Sabertooth on the sides being acided all game long, so they really didn't get a lot of level as well. All right, another big chunk of damage done to me. Underground threat is interesting. That adds even more chaff for him to deal with. And for me, right now, I'm just keep adding chaff. So extra 2 sets of fans. And I realize I just have a lot of money. So I figure, what's the best way to spend a lot of money? Well, upgrades and war factories. So I reintroduced the war factory now that I'm a little bit more confident with my midline and also my chaff. More so with the underground threat as well. Reintroduce the war factory, give it extended range so that now it can hit these melting point from afar. And with 400 left over, I think it might make sense just to upgrade the war factory once again. I do have intensive training. Okay, so I've decided just to strengthen my midline a little bit more. And that makes sense as well because I did have a problem with just surviving in the midline, so my war factory wasn't doing enough damage before it gets locked on. My opponent did something very interesting. He added this entire backline of Mustangs, and Mustangs are great for chaff clear for these smaller units. And once the smaller units are gone, they move forward and they become chaff themselves. So this is a great strategy. Unfortunately, I'm not doing too much on the frontline chaff anymore, but instead I've been strengthening my sort of midline medium-sized units. So these Mustangs aren't actually doing that much against my Sabertooth. Electromag is on the mountain point. I don't have a lot of technology, to be honest. Yes, there is replicate on the crawlers, but aside from that, I mean, there's range. The Stormcrawlers aren't really getting hit by the missiles because of my chaff screen so far forward. These level 1 Mustangs, yes, they're doing a bit of work, but so are my Stormcrawlers. So they're actually bringing those down very quickly. And as you can see here, my midline is preventing these melting point. Another way to get midline is to get launcher overload on your Stormcrawlers. Stormcrawlers are really good in the late game to clear out sort of the initial chaff, but once they're cleared, and in this case, I have the high explosive, so they don't really do too much damage to giant units. So once the front line is cleared, it will be good to have them serve as a line of chaff as well. It doesn't matter if they're low in health, because think about it, the units that are typically deadly to Stormcrawlers are sledgehammers. You're looking at sort of mid-sized units. Once you get to fortresses or even mountain points, these, like, they always overkill or they spend too long on these units anyways. So it's okay to have Stormcrawlers move forward in front of your heavy hitters in the later stages of the game. But you don't want to have it too early though, right? Because if you have it too early before the backline is built, then your Stormcrawlers will just die to sledgehammers and it's not going to do too well. Free units was offered. I picked the Vulcan. It made sense to me. I didn't need a level 3 Vulcan. I really just needed some Vulcan to do fire bombs. So I sold a level 3 Vulcan, bought 2 more level 1 Vulcans, used extra money to do something else. So I got the Vulcans. I upgraded my Mustangs. Mustangs on this side is absolute beast. It's now level 6. The other side is level 4, very soon to be level 5. So these are carry Mustangs. Not that I really needed them for chaff clear, but they're now beyond chaff clear. My chaff clear right now mostly comes from Vulcans and these Stormcrawlers. I took launcher overload after seeing how strong my midline chaff was last game, so I just wanted to get in there and do even more damage quickly. The war factory was locked on by this mountain point. It was quite scary because they kept getting stuck on hitting units on the side, but with launcher overload, it was able to bring them down fairly quickly. On the other side, as you can see, my opponent is still struggling with my midline. I think Sabretooth is one of those units that's unexpectedly powerful. Yes, at level 1 they're kind of weak, but once you add range and you give them proper support, they can become a very strong midline chaff. And I use the word chaff is because sure, they're doing a lot of damage, but ultimately they're a screen for the War Factory. And with that, that is GG. All right, so I'm going to jump into a bit of post-battle analysis because I was talking to Sam after the game, and he was asking for some advice on what could have done in the very last round of the game. So let's take a look at the board. The first thing I noticed is that he took high explosive on the Mustangs. It didn't make a lot of sense, and because it's a second tech, it's quite expensive. Level 1 Mustangs is already very weak. High explosive just makes them even weaker. With high explosive, you're doing really not a lot of damage. And because of my focus right now, starting at round 8, hasn't been these frontline chaff, I figure my frontline chaff was doing what it needs to do. I've been adding a lot of midline units to tank the melting point instead of the frontline units because I believe that I can kill your chaff clear faster than you can kill my chaff clear. And therefore, the real problem is not chaff or the small chaff. The real problem is these larger units. So my opponent, by going with this technology, it didn't help with his cost. Yes, he's going to clear out my chaff very quickly, but that's okay. None of your sledgehammers are clearing my Sabretooth very quickly, and I am just keep shelling on you with Stonecrawlers and Sabretooth. So they're going to die very quickly. Your Mustangs are going to die very quickly. So this is not a not the best move here. I don't think so. I think the Mustangs are going to be great, especially when you're introducing Mustangs at round 8, level 1 Mustangs. I wouldn't even get range. Why is that? You say, isn't Mustangs like super weak? Yeah, they are super weak. But they work well in clearing out in the sort of frontline chaff because they also have a lot of unit counts. So they are 12 Mustangs per unit. They serve as a great chaff clear, chaff themselves. So I wouldn't even get range because what it allowed them to do is once my chaff can all run to the front, they kill them, and then they run to the front tanking for the more important units, which in this case is usually the sledgehammers, right? So usually the game works this way here. So I have my fans and crawlers run up to the front. They get destroyed, right? And then on my side, my Sabretooth runs to the front, and then they start hitting on the sledgies. And once they're hitting on the sledgies, my War Factory goes to the front and they're hitting on the melting point. So that's the stage of the game. And if you understand this is my stage of the game, what you need to do at your stage of the game, well, is to prevent me from transitioning from one stage to another. So on the very first round, your goal would be, how do I stop Stoney from killing my chaff fast enough so that his units is mostly the sledgehammers, not so that Sabretooth can get to my sledgehammers, right? So that if that didn't work, because I have a high explosive Stonecrawlers, so they're very efficient at dealing with smaller chaff units. If that didn't work, the next question is, how do you prevent the Sabretooth hitting the sledgehammers before I started to hit them, right? So he can either increase his chaff clear, allowing his melting point to lock onto the Sabretooth a little faster, or he can protect his units. I think by not having upgrades on these Mustangs, they contribute to both. One is they're going to run up, they clear out the first round of smaller units a little bit faster. Then they become chaff instead of shooting. So right now they're at the same range as the sledgehammers. So with range, they're essentially shooting with the sledgehammers. And what that means, my Sabretooth are still hitting your sledgehammers and my rockets are just shelling this entire line. If you don't have range, your Mustangs will move forward 40 meters away from the sledgehammers, providing another round of screen for my units to shoot at, allowing your saber-tooth to get locked onto your sledgehammers to get locked onto my saber-tooth. So I think that would be the right play. But overall, I think Sam did a great job. He added a lot of pressure in the mid round. I was forcing me to kind of scramble a little bit, and I did scramble quite a lot. So it was very good game for him. I think the very last round, I think just the decision to really focus on the initial chaff was not an ideal solution. Instead of having all this tech, imagine if you didn't have these tech, right? So this is what 300 plus 250 plus the premium. That's 750 worth of supplies. You could have put down 3 sets of Stormcallers, and that would have contributed a lot more to your Mustangs. All right. So the analysis was a bit long this game, but I hope you learned something new. And I hope you enjoyed this cast, and I'll see you on the next one.